All right, Jabosai, good morning, a good tavach, an incredible schus Baruch Hashem to be able to begin a new week of learning together. Exciting Masechah Shevuos. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tilsim Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar Haba Alinu Latova, Shmuel and Rabin Karabki, information of the yard site of Shmuel's father, Lipa ben Yecheskel HaKohen, Zichrono Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Hillary Jacobs in Kent, in memory of her daughter, Shifra, Zichrono Livracha Bas Chana Dina Shiachia. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Chol Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu should Hashem bring home all of our hostages, b'shalom and b'karov, and our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. Let's say with that, let us begin. Exciting stuff ahead of us this week. It just keeps getting better and better every day. So today's daf is, what is today's daf? Yud Zayin, 17. We are picking up on Tes Zayin Amud Beis. We left off in the middle of Amud Beis at the two dots. The sugi that begins so probably about 15 lines up from the bottom. Amarava. So let's remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So if you remember again in the Mishnah, we dealt with two cases of tumah. Up until a few days ago, the case of tumah we were dealing with was someone becomes tameh outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and then ultimately forgets about their tumah, and then enters into the Mikdash in a state of tumah. What we then transitioned to was a new case, and in this new case, someone became tameh inside of the Beis HaMikdash. So then what's the status, or specifically, what's carbonic liability? So to that, the Mishnah explained it depends. What does it depend on? Do you tarry? Are you lingering? So if you become tameh in the Mikdash, get out quickly, take the shortest way out, then halacha l'maisa, you have no carbonic liability. If, however, again, you tarry, now it's interesting because there are two expressions that were used with this tarry-kite, right, with this tarrying. One was kidei ishtachava, the amount of time it takes to prostrate yourself, and the other is talking about the idea that you take the long way out. So now the Gemara is going to clarify this a little bit. Amar Rava. Rava said as follows: Lo shana ela sheishtachava klape pnim. So first of all, when we speak about bowing, you're only chayiv. So again, now we'll call up Reuven. Reuven is inside of the Beis HaMikdash. He becomes tameh in the Beis HaMikdash. If he now begins to prostrate himself, he is liable for that. He's liable. Rava qualifies this. The only type of prostration you're liable for is if you prostrate yourself kind of facing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, facing in, facing straight forward. But if you bow down the opposite way, right, the opposite way, in other words, with your back towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right, so facing the exit, then halacha l'maisa, you are not liable for prostration, unless, of course, you stay in the Beis HaMikdash for too long. So we'll say, I'm going to tell you this now, and then we'll see it inside just a moment. We're going to see that essentially there are two different shiurim. There's two different shiurim. There's hishtachava, which is prostration, and then there's shehiyah, which is lingering. So if you bow down, even if you're a quick bower, and you bow down in the right way, there's liability. If you're bowing down in the wrong way, that's not called bowing, and therefore there's only liability if you linger. So now the Gemara is telling us, what is the definition of hishtachava? Hishtachava means prostration in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Anything not in the direction of the Kodesh is not called hishtachava. Not called hishtachava. It could be called lingering if you're there for long enough, but it's not called hishtachava. The Gemara says, therefore, if you bow down, facing away from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, shaha in, lo shaha lo. If you linger, you're liable, but if you don't linger, you're not liable. So others explain this on the Seifa. If you linger there long enough for the amount that it takes to prostrate yourself, miklal, gufa by. Now that makes it sound like even in prostration itself, you still require some type of lingering. So what's going on? Amar Rava, no. Lo shanu el ishtachava klape chutz, ava klape pnim afagav de lo shah. Okay, so here it is. This is the line. So Rava says like this: if you're bowing down in the right way, what's the definition of the right way? Definition of right way? Towards Kodesh HaKadoshim. Towards Kodesh HaKadoshim, that's called ishtachava, and you are liable. In other words, you are liable now a carbon ola v'yored for having remained in the Beis Hamikdash in a state of tumah. If you bow down not facing the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that is not called bowing. In other words, this is very interesting. The halachic definition of hishtachava is prostration in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you're not in the right direction, it's not called hishtachava. So again, if you bow down in the wrong direction, you're liable. If what? If you linger. Now we haven't defined what lingering means yet, but you're chayiv if you linger. Incredible. What does it mean to say? If you go ahead and you bow down in the right direction, or you linger for the amount of time that it takes to prostrate yourself. So we'll say, so now we begin to see it as follows. Essentially, prostration can either be an act or it can be a duration. So meaning what? If I become tummy inside of the Beis Hamikdash, and I bow down in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I'm liable. If I bow down in a different direction, so then again, I'm not chayiv for bowing, I can be chayiv for lingering if I linger in the mikdash for the amount of time that it would normally take to bow. Okay, incredible. Samar says as follows. The Gemara goes, good. The less peishia. So I'll say, give me an example. So now, explain to me bowing that has lingering, bowing that doesn't have lingering. So the Gemara says, the less peishia, zukriya ba'almas. Well, so we're going to see in the world of bowing. So ultimately, again, there is bowing with lingering and there's bowing without lingering. So the Gemara says, the less peishia, zukriya ba'alma. So literally again, so bowing without lingering, that's kriya. What's kriya, both say? So kriya is kind of like v'anachnu korim, right? In other words, just a bow, a quick bow. So literally again, like a bowing at the waist, or at the knees, that ultimately again could be hishtachava without shehiyah. Deis be'shehiyah. What's an example of bowing that has lingering? Pishut yadayim v'raglayim. That's prostration. That's like, spread out flat on the ground. The kamashir shehiyah. So we'll say, but again, this is all interesting, but remember in halacha is all about quantifying shiurim. So halacha l'maisa again, so what is the actual time frame, right? In other words, if we're going to create liability, I need to know time-wise, how long do I need to be in the Beis Hamikdash in order to be liable after having contracted tumah? So Pligi bar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chad di'imei. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani and one of his Korabanim had a debate. Who was Umanu? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. V'amrilei Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'chad di'imei. Umanu Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. V'amrilei Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani. Okay, machlokes. Chad Amar kimemrei dehai psuka. So one said, the amount of time that you are liable for remaining in the Mikdash ultimately is the amount of time that it takes to say this pasuk. We'll see what this pasuk is in just a moment. The Chad Amar mi v'yichru l'seifa. And one said the amount of time that it's v'yichru to the seifa. What's the pasuk that we're referring to over here? So the Gemara says as follows. The pasuk is v'chol b'nei Yisrael roim beredes ha'esh ukvod Hashem al habayis v'yichru apayim arza al haritzba v'yishtakavu v'hodos la'Hashem kitov kiliolam chasdo divrei hayomim. So again, the machlokes says, is it the amount of time that it takes to say the whole pasuk, the amount of time that it takes to say part of the pasuk? But that's the shir, which Rabbi say you begin to see is a very short shir. A very short shir, which means that literally, in order to avoid liability, the moment that I find out that I'm tamei, I need to get out as quickly as possible. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, good. Kidas, now that the Gemara introduced us, Rabbi says, I just want to point out, first nugget of information for today, Rava. What does Rava teach us? That if I contract tumah inside of the Beis HaMikdash, so obviously my obligation is to get out as quickly as possible. How much time do I have? So I'm not allowed to remain there for the amount of time either of lingering or prostration. Now, what's the difference? So, definition of prostration is bowing down in the direction of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Bowing down in any other direction is not called bowing. It's not called bowing. So, in any other direction, I'm liable if I linger. What's the definition of lingering? The definite machlokes, is it the amount of time to say that entire pasuk or just part of the pasuk? Beautiful. Tanrabanan. Now that we spoke about prostration, the Gemara just talks about different forms of prostration. Tanrabanan. Kida. Alapayim. So Rabbi say what's called kida? that's called falling on your face. Kind of like what we do by Tachnun. Right? Like Tachnun. V'cheinu omer, v'tikod b'sheva apayim aretz. Kriya al birkayim. Kriya is bowing down on your knees. V'cheinu omer, michra al birkav. Hishtachava, that's what's called zu pisha tadayim v'raglayim. That's called prostration. Right? Where literally, again, I want to say, like a person is just flat out on the ground. V'cheinu omer, havonovo ani ve'imcha v'achecha l'shtachavos l'cha arza. Okay? Abai Rava. So here we go. Another interesting case. So last two lines, Tes Zainam with Beis. Abai Rava. Sarach sheheh l'malkus, o ein sarach sheheh l'malkus. So Rava asked the following shayla. Do you require sheheh l'malkus? Well, remember again, up until this entire point, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about carbonic liability. All right, so now in other words, here's what I know. I know that if I'm in the Beis HaMikdash and I contract Tumah, I got to get out as quickly as possible. And if I delay, however we're defining delay, I am liable to a carbon olevio rate. Fine. We'll say, what about the following? Let's say, look at Rashi, actually, that's Rashi Nafla Malkus. Im hisrubo shelo la'amod va'amad pachos michadei shehiyah. So let's say, now watch this. Let's say I'm in the Beis HaMikdash and I become Tameh. And right after I become Tameh, I'm warned, ultimately again, get out as quickly as you can. And I delay, not long enough to incur carbonic liability, but the question is long enough to potentially incur malchus, right? Because remember again, if you remain in the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah, one is in violation of a lav. So now I got hasra, but interestingly enough, I remained in the Mikdash even after the hasra, after the violation, but not kidei shehiyah. So let's say, for example, let's just give an example. Let's say kidei shehiyah is 20 seconds, for argument's sake. 20 seconds, right? So Lamaisa, I'll say, by the way, it's interesting. You think about this in just a moment, that it seems like such a short amount of time to get out. It's fascinating how different events in life sensitize you to different realities. So you think about this, like how could somebody get out in such a short amount of time? Then also you think about what our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael have been going through, right? When the sirens go off, right? How long? First of all, a special welcome to our Shia member of Daniel Pava from Modina Chashmonaim, who's joining us, one of our online Shia members. Baruch Hashem, a great Chavra. Make sure you be friendly. Be friendly, right? All right, good, okay, excellent, good. You don't have to do it right now, all right? But good, right? So, how long do you have for the sirens? Once. So how long? How long do you have for the sirens? Once the sirens go off to get to a miklat. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So, you think about this, like we're living in times where people have a very short amount of time to traverse a distance. You're close, you're short, it's just interesting how like different events sensitize us to realities. Gemara is talking about, a situation that we haven't had for 2,000 years. Something happens, I got to get somewhere quickly. And amazing how like we have this same yesod, obviously in a very different context. But Lamaisa, the Gemara is asking like this. So let's say now, halacha Lamaisa, so I became Tameh inside of the Beis HaMikdash, so I'm not staying there kedei shehiyah. So therefore there's no carbonic liability. But now the shaila is there malchus liability? Fascinating, right? Because I'm in violation of a lav, because I'm remaining in the Mikdash, ultimately in a state of tumah. So the Maisa, is there malchus or not? So the Gemara says, Bai Rava, tzarach sheheh l'malchus, ein tzarach sheheh l'malchus. Do we say that the same way that a carbon requires sheheh lingering, so too malchus requires lingering? Or no, maybe not. Maybe lingering is a din ultimately again in carbon, but not a din in malchus. The carbon gemiri sheheh the carbon gemiri shehiyah, the malchus lo gemiri shehiyah. Maybe lingering is only a din by carbon, but not by malchus. Top of Yud Zayin. O dilma bifnim gemiri shehiyah, lo shna the carbon, but lo shna the malchus. Or maybe no, maybe it doesn't make a difference. In other words, if you're becoming tamei, there's a din of shehiyah for all halachos regarding tumah in the Beis HaMikdash, whether it's for carbon or whether it's for malchus. So we'll say, what's the halacha? The Gemara says, teku. We don't know. Tishbi yitaris kushos yibayos. Good kasha, no answer. And Rabbi says, we always say, what do we do right after a teiko? Move on, because Yiddishkeit conditions us that in life there are many questions, some of them really good questions, and some of them overwhelming questions for which you are not going to find an answer. So you have two options, two choices: perseverate, right, and just like focus on it and just hyper focus on it and lose yourself in the inability to find the answers to your questions, or move on. Move on. Understand that it's a good kasha. The day will come when we will get all of our answers. What does he have to do? A teiku? Next. Bye, Rava. This is a great case. Tala atzmo ba'avir azara mahu. Okay, watch this. What happens if you suspend yourself in the air of the azara? You suspend yourself, right? You're flying in the azara. So Rabbi says, so now this is an interesting case because what's happening over here? What's happening over here? Right? I become tamei inside of the Beis HaMikdash, but now I'm suspended. Now, by the way, both say you can have. Remember, as we've been learning long enough to know that halacha l'maisa, the Gemara will always come up with cases that you're like, come on, that's never going to happen. You might be right, but that doesn't make a difference. Remember, again, sometimes Chazal purposely bring exaggerated cases in order to bring out a point. What are we trying to figure out over here? Trying to figure out if I become tamei in the Beis HaMikdash, and let's say my feet are not on the ground. My feet are not on the ground. I'm hovering in the air of the Mikdash. Is there liability for that? So the Gemara says, Ki gemiri shehiyah debasishtachava, dela basishtachava lo gemiri. So on one hand, do we say that maybe the only time you're chayiv for lingering is when that is a lingering which could result in prostration, which means what? You got to be on the ground. But if it's a lingering that can't result in prostration, why not? Because I'm suspended in the air of the Azara, maybe there's no liability. O dilma bifnim shia gemiri loshna debasishtachava loshna dela basishtachava. Or maybe not. In other words, maybe lingering is just a din of lingering. So whether you're lingering on the ground, you're lingering in the airspace, there's going to be liability. We'll say, what's the question? What's the answer? Teiku. Gemara leaves this unanswered. So I will say, by the way, I was looking at this Gemara last night. I thought it was like such a beautiful metaphor that a person could be tamei but still soaring in the air, right? So here this guy is tamei, but yet lamaisa at the same time he's levitating. It's not a stira. Right? In any given moment in life, I'm tamei and I'm soaring. I'm tamei and I'm climbing. I'm tamei and I'm growing. Most of us live in these two states simultaneously all of the time. So it's almost like what the Gemara is saying, so what's your status? Are you a growing person, right? Are you literally a ben aliyah, right? Are you going up? Or are you tamei? And the Gemara says, teiku. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes in life, I'm not exactly sure. Like, am I going up or am I going down? But l'maisa will say, you know what the ikar is? That even if you're tamei, make sure you're consistently and constantly a ben aliyah. Even if you're tamei, because we all have it. There are certain things in my life right now that are tamei. And the truth is, they're going to remain tamei. We all have those pockets of our life that I know I need to change, but the reality is, they're not changing right now. And all too often we assume that because they're not changing right now, therefore that precludes me from being a growing individual. And it's not true. You could be tamei in the Beis HaMikdash, but still find a way to lift yourself up. That is the essence of what it means to be a yid. I'm tamei, but still growing. Incredible. Let's go back there. By Rav Ashi, Nazir B'Kever. So it's another interesting case. Nazir B'Kever. What's the case of Nazir B'Kever? Look at Rashi. Nazir B'Kever. This is very interesting. Nazir Shnitma Ba'ones B'Soch Beis HaKvaris. Tumya Denitma Ba'azara. Shaloneschaye B'Chnisaso Kigon Shenichnas LaBeis HaKvaris B'Shida Teva Umigdal Ubachaveru Para Alaves Ma'azivas Gag HaOhel. So it says, listen to this case. Similar case what we were seeing before. So a Nazir enters into a cemetery. Now, interesting enough, the way that Rashi frames the case is, he enters into a cemetery, let's say in a carriage, right? In a closed box. In a closed carriage. Then his friend meets him, and now he's going through a cemetery. Now, because it's a closed carriage, he wouldn't contract tumah. His friend hears that he's going through a cemetery. He decides to surprise his Nazir friend, right? Pops open the door of the carriage, surprise, right? So now suddenly again, the Nazir is in a cemetery. So this is similar to the case of the guy who becomes tamei inside of the Beis HaMikdash. What's the commonality? In both cases, they entered in a state of tara and only subsequently became tamei. So therefore, again, that's what's called Nazir Bekever. So by Shia Malkus, this is very interesting. So Moses says, now watch this case. So the Nazir entered into the cemetery in a closed carriage, so he was fine. Somebody propped open the door. Now he became Tameh. See, here's the Shaila. Do we say that the Nazir also only becomes Tameh if he lingers? But if he gets out quickly, perhaps there is no liability. So do we say the din of Shia of lingering is only a din inside of the Beis Hamikdash, but outside of the Beis Hamikdash there's no din of Shia? In other words, you become Tumah instantaneously. Or maybe not. Maybe lingering. Ultimately, again, maybe lingering is a din in ones, in extenuating circumstances. It doesn't matter in the Beis Hamikdash, outside of the Beis Hamikdash. To which the Gemara says, Teku. Once again, unanswered question. Next, Balo Baruka Chai B'Ktsar Pat. So now we're up to the next part of the Mishnah. So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? Same case. I'm in the Beis Hamikdash. I walk in Tahar. I become Tameh inside of the Beis Hamikdash. So now what did the Mishnah say? If I get out as quickly as I can, meaning find the nearest exit, then I do not incur liability. If I take the long way out, then ultimately I incur liability. Amar Rava. So we'll say Rava, another statement of Rava. Amar Rava. Ktsara sha'amru, afilu akev be'etz b'tzad godel, va'afilu b'chol hayom kulo. So this is fascinating. Rava says, as long as you take the nearest exit, even if you walk very slowly, you're not liable. Now we'll say this expression of Ekev B'tzad Godel means literally like you walk in a way where you put literally one foot right in front of the other. So like your big toe is touching your heel, right? So you're walking one small step after the other, and even if it takes you the entire day to get out of the Beis Hamikdash, that's how slow you're walking. Ultimately, again, there's still no liability. So we'll say this is wild. So Rav essentially saying is, as long as you take the closest exit, the shortest way out, even if the shortest way out takes you the longest amount of time, you are not liable. You're not liable. I'll say, this is reminiscent of what Chazal call the derech kitzara shehi aruka. Derech kitzara, we learned this in Tanya a few weeks ago. Derech kitzara shehi aruka. There's a short path, but sometimes the short path can be very long. Conversely, sometimes there's a derech aruka shehi kitzara. And just an aside. So by Rava says as follows. Now, by the way, just okay, fine, I said already. So remember again, in Chazal, the derech kitzara shehi aruka represents again that in life, we try to take shortcuts. Right? You see shortcuts. Oh, look, there's a life hack for this, or a shortcut for this. And what happens? It looks like a derech kitzara, but I will say we know more often in life, when you take shortcuts for meaningful things, those shortcuts often become incredibly circuitous, difficult, and actually don't get me where I need to go. That's called the derech kitzara shehi aruka. Shortcut, that's really a very long way. Conversely, very often in life, the derech aruka shehi kitzara. So very often in life, the path to choose is the long way, because the long way may take a little bit more time, but it's going to get you where you need to go. So Rava says over here, fascinating, that if you take the shortcut, right, the shortest way out, even if it takes you a very long time, you're not liable. So by Rava brings down shios ma'ashi starfu. It's interesting. So say, let's assume for a moment again that the amount of time for lingering for which you're liable is 30 seconds. So the shaila is, if you linger incrementally, let's say I linger 5 seconds, I walk. I linger 5 seconds, I walk. Can those increments of lingering combine to form the shear or not? So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, apparently not. Based on what Rava just said, because Rava said, as long as you're headed out the right exit, even if it takes you the whole day, you are not liable. To which so obviously then lingering does not go ahead and combine. To which the Gemara says, no, hasam b'delo shah. Rav is talking about an idea where halacha l'maisa, I'm taking the shortest exit, and even though it takes me the whole day, I never stop. I'm constantly moving. I'm constantly walking. I'm just walking very slowly. So Abai asked the following question. So again, this is the other statement of Rava. Again, Rava says, as long as you take the shortest exit, the closest exit, even if you delay, right? Even if you walk very slowly, even if it takes you the entire day, you are not liable. Which I will say also a tremendous Musar Haskell. In life, as long as you're on the right derech, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not looking how long it takes you. As long as I put myself on the right path to self-actualization and growth, even if the results don't materialize so quickly, but I'm headed in the right direction, that's all the Ribono Shel Olam wants. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. So by mine, by me Rabba, so from Rabba, Balo Baruch Shir Ktsara Mahu. Oh, watch this. So we'll say, so let's say now I become Tameh. I'm in the base of Mikdash. I become Tameh. What happens? So I got to get out. I get it. So what do? I scan the exits, right? Exits to the right, in front, and in back, right? Illuminated line, right? So what happens? I know exactly where to go. Here's the issue. I know, so it'll take me 10 seconds to go ahead and get out the closest exit. But the truth is, there's another exit that's further, but if I run, I could also get there in 10 seconds. So what if I could take the longer path, but I'll run, so I'll make it there in the same amount of time that it would have taken me to get out the closer exit? Is there liability? And I do that. So I end up exiting the Beis HaMikdash through the further exit, but within the same window of time that it would have taken me to get out of the closer exit. So is there liability in a case like that as well? It's fascinating. Now, the Gemara says, Mao, Shir Gemiri, V'chibalo Baruka Shir K'tzara Pater, O Dilma Dafka Gemiri, Baruka Chai B'K'tzara Pater. So essentially what the Gemara is asking is like this. Is this a shear? Like, is this a shear in time? And therefore, as long as I get out of the Beis HaMikdash within the shear, who cares how you got out? Or no, this is a din in the closest exit. So again, I will say, this is our case. So let's say, in my case, I know that to get out the closest exit would have taken me 10 seconds. It turns out I made a mad dash for longer exit. I got out in 9 seconds. So again, if it's a din, if it's a shear in time, then I'm not liable. If it's a din, that the halacha says, no, you gotta take the closest exit. So it doesn't make a difference how fast I get out the longer one, there's still gonna be liability. To which the Gemara says, Amrlei, lo nitna aruka lehidachos etzlo. Essentially what the Gemara says is, it's a din. It's not a shear. Interestingly enough, it's a din. What's the din? The din is closest exit. Closest exit. And I will say, by the way, you could see this. I tell you could see this. You know why this comes up? I was thinking about this last night. I don't know, these Gemaras excite me a lot because any Beis HaMikdash Gemaras are very exciting. Like imagine like you're in the Beis HaMikdash, just imagine you're in the Beis HaMikdash. You become Tameh, which is not exciting, but you become Tameh, right? So now what happens? You can see this by the way, right? The closest exit, there's a lot of people there. The farther exit, no one's there. So I know that it's easy for me, by the way, think about it, even like without running, right? Even without running, I know I can get out from the farther exit faster than the closer exit. So what should I do? So the Gemara says it's a din, which makes sense. It's a halacha. What does the halacha say? Closest exit. That's the halacha. Even if technically speaking, not only can you get to the further exit in the same time, even if you get to the further exit in less time, it's a halacha, which I would say makes sense because the moment you give this to a shear is the moment that this whole halacha falls apart. So that's halacha. Therefore, again, no matter what, take the closest exit, and if you don't, there is carbonic liability. Incredible. Maskif the Rabbi Zera, listen to this. Ela dekaim alon tamei sheshimish b'misa. Suppose another interesting halacha. If you have a kohen who is tamei, so the halacha is, and he does avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, he is chayiv misa bidei shamayim, death at the hands of heaven. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. How can you ever have a case where this, so again, so the right Kohen who's Tameh does the avodah, is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. So the Gemara says, heichim mishkachas la. How are you ever going to find this case? Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is the second wide line. Heichim mishkachas la de'ein bakares. That was saying now generally, if you remain or you linger in the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah, you're chayiv kares. Now remember again, kares and misa b'dei shamayim are different punishments. Both bad, right? Both bad, but different punishments. So the punishment for a Tamei Kohen doing the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash is misa b'dei shamayim. The punishment for lingering in the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah is kares. So the Gemara says, let me get this straight. So if a Kohen does avodah while Tamei in the Beis HaMikdash, he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. But won't he automatically be chayiv kares? Why? Because if he's doing the avodah, then what is he doing? He's lingering. He's lingering. So how do you ever have a case where he's not chayiv kares? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Hechi mishkachas la. Idelo shah, hechi avad avoda. If he didn't linger, then how did he do the avoda? Right? In other words, avoda takes time. And id shah, and if he lingered, then bar karesu, then he's chayiv kares. So watch this. I amrit bishlama shira gemiri mishkachas la da'anes nafshe b'kitzara v'avad avoda. So if you understand that lingering is a shear in time, then this makes sense. Why? Kohen becomes tameh. He realizes he's got to get out. He's got to get out quickly. So he realizes time to the closest exit, 30 seconds. He's like, no problem. I got this. Right? So he figures, you know what? I'm going to run, and I only need, if I run, I'll shave off 10 seconds. I got 20 seconds. That leaves me 10 seconds for avoda. Right? Incredible. So what does he do within the 30-second window? Now, by the way, all of this is bad, right? He should not be doing this. But sometimes people mean well, they just end up doing really bad things. So he figures to himself, okay, I'm going to run, shave off 10 seconds. That gives me 20 seconds to exit, 10 seconds to do the avoda. And he does, I know, he shechs, he does zrika, whatever he does, right, within 10 seconds. Then that makes sense. It makes sense. However, he pushed himself avoda. So again, he knows the amount of time that it takes to get to the closest exit. He runs, shaves off 10 seconds, uses the rest of that shear, the rest of that time for avoda. Amud Beis, flying today. Ella, I'm gonna have to slow down. Ella amrit, dafka, Ella imra dafka gemiri heichim mishkachasla. But if you understand that it's not a shear in time, right? But rather, again, there's just the din of getting out as quickly as possible. How is he going to do the avoda? We'll say, right? You hear the shaila. In other words, again. If he's doing, if you understand that lingering is a shear in time. So in other words, and I will say, interestingly enough, what's the shear of lingering? Right? It's a shachava, but really, it's the amount of time it takes to get to the closest exit, right? Which means it's subjective, right? So it all depends on where I am. So the Lamaisa, again, if you understand that it's a shear, it's a defined amount of time or a subjective amount of time, then great. Kohen can understand 30 seconds to get to the closest exit. If I run, I can make it in 20. That gives me 10 seconds. I can use that remaining 10 seconds for avoda. Then I could have a case of a Kohen who does avoda while he's tameh, never ends up lingering, and therefore, again, it's not chayiv kares, but will be chayiv misi b'dei shamayim. But if you hold that the din of shehiyah is not a din of lingering, it's objectively, you just got to get out the closest exit, so then how can you ultimately, again, have this case of a Kohen who is liable? To which the words, Rabbi, my kashya. What's the question? This is very interesting. Mashkachas la kegon sheba bekitzara v'hafich bitzinura. What's the case? The Yisrael say we're looking at avoda as like a longer process. The Gemara gives an answer: is there is a type of avoda which is very fast. What's the avoda? Where the Kohen is going out the closest exit, right? So therefore, again, he's going to avoid lingering. And what does he do on the way out? He takes a fork, right, the sacrificial fork, and he flips the piece of meat on the mizbeach, right? Remember, again, the meat's burning on the mizbeach, so what does he do? He flips it, and that's, in other words, flipping the meat on the mizbeach and causing it to burn, ultimately is part of the avodah zone. I will say, you could imagine, that's something you could do really quickly on your way out. We're imagining avodah as an involved process. This is not involved. So as he's walking out, he flips the piece of meat on his way out. So therefore, again, this could be a case where he didn't remain in the mikdash long enough for shehiyah, for lingering. Therefore, he's not going to be chayiv kares, but he will be chayiv misi b'dei shamayim because he's a Kohen who's tameh, who did the avodah. Incredible. So Rav Huna, zar shahapach betzinura chayiv misa. Rav Huna says that literally, again, a non-Kohen who flips sacrificial meat with a fork, with a sacrificial fork, ultimately, again, is chayiv misa. So what do you see from that? That it's an avoda. That's part of the avoda. Okay, so let's analyze this a little bit because it's actually quite intriguing. So the Gemara says, Gufa, Rav Huna, zar shapach b'tinura chayiv misa. So we just said before that if a non-Kohen goes ahead and flips a piece of sacrificial meat with a fork, he's chayiv misa. So hechidami, what's the case? So if we're talking about a case where, let's say, for whatever the reason, the meat wasn't burning, right? And had he not flipped it or by the way, I'm using the word flip it, but it doesn't have to be flip it. It could also just be move it. In other words, the point over here is I'm just going to use flip as the expression because that's hafach, right? If we're talking about that, had he not flipped it, the meat would not have burned, then pshita, obviously that's avoda. Obviously that's avoda, right? Because lamais, again, he's doing something ultimately, again, to expedite this process. Now, if on the other hand, we're talking about a case where what? Where Allah lamais, even had he not flipped it, right? Even had he not flipped it, ultimately, I'm sorry, and if had he not flipped it, the meat would have been burned, then my kavid. Then what is he doing? So just trying to figure out. So remember again, just understand what are we trying to accomplish here? You're like, that's an excellent question. I have no idea. All right, what are we trying to accomplish besides coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and getting tremendous schar for learning His Torah? We're trying to find a very specific case. The Gemara said that a Kohen who's tamei, who does avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, is chayiv misa bidei shamayim. Okay, that's a fact. The Gemara just kind of threw out at us. The problem with that is we've been operating with the principle that if you're tamei and you linger in the Beis Hamikdash, you're what? You're chayiv kares. Kares. So now the Gemara is trying to figure out. I don't understand. How do you ever have a case of a Kohen who's doing avodah in the Beis Hamikdash tamei and not lingering? By definition, he needs to be lingering. He's doing avodah. If he's lingering, what's the problem? He's chayiv kares, not misbidei shamayim. Kares is worse than misbidei shamayim. He's chayiv kares and not misbidei shamayim. So as we're trying to figure out, how can you find a case where a Kohen who's tamei is doing the avodah, but he's not lingering? He's not lingering. Otherwise, I got it. Here's the case. The case is on his way out. He flipped a piece of sacrificial meat with his fork. Right, so that's quick, that's fast, right? And you can see a Kohen doing that kind of like not even stopping, right? Not even stopping. He's got his fork out. I guess Kohanim have their own forks, right? He's got his own Kohanic fork. On his way out, literally walking out, he flips the piece of meat. So the Gemara says, okay, so therefore again, he could be doing avodah, but not lingering, and therefore Allah Chalamaysa, he's chayiv misbidei shamayim and not kares. The Gemara says, well, let's talk about this just a moment, right? When he flips that piece of meat, what is he doing? So if the piece of meat would not have been consumed on the fire without his flippage, right? Then lemaisa, okay. Then lemaisa, I understand that's avodah. If the piece of meat would have been consumed without his flippage, then I like it. It's good. No, I think it works. Right? Good. Without, right? If it would have burned anyway without his intervention, then Lamaisa, what is he doing? Then why should he be liable? His act is inconsequential. The Gemara said, which by the way, if you think about it, is such a profound yesod. Sometimes, like, how do you know what you're supposed to be focused on in life? How do you know? So I think the answer is I don't know. I don't know how, but I would think that something interesting to look at is look for the things that no one else is doing. And if it's not going to get done unless you do it, that's a pretty good indication that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you involved in that. If your efforts are duplicative, right? If your efforts, whatever, someone else is going to do it, then it could very well be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs you to put your efforts elsewhere. So it's interesting, right? The Gemara says, if the meat's going to burn anyway, so the Kohen's act of flippage is inconsequential, it doesn't mean anything. And on the other hand, if his flippage causes it to burn, then Lemais, again, that's consequential. Again, let's say, sometimes we're like, it's fascinating life that we're so drawn to like replicate and duplicate things that other people do, right? Which sometimes is good. Like there's a positive peer pressure in that also. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us each in this world to accomplish something special and unique. Sometimes that's what you need to have your eyes open for. What are the things that dafka need you, that others are not doing, that others are not paying attention to? That's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu perhaps wants you to focus your avodah. The Gemara says, "Lo tzricha." What's the case? It's very interesting. Lo tzricha, dilo hafach ba. Me'achli betarta shoi, v'hashta me'achli bechad shaita. Oh, interesting compromise answer. The Gemara says, no. The meat would have burned, but without the flippage, it would have burned in 2 hours. And now with the flippage, it's 1 hour. It's 1 hour. So lemaisa, the actions of the Kohen were consequential. V'akamash balon, dechol krove avoda, avodahi. And the Gemara says, what do you see from here? that any expediting of service is considered itself to be service. So it's fascinating, right? So the meat would have burned regardless, but it would have taken 2 hours. Now, post flippage, it's only 1 hour. It's only 1 hour. And Kamashman, you would have thought, come on, what is expediting the burning of sacrificial meat? What does it mean? No, it does mean something. Which I both say, by the way, what do you see from here? It's incredible. This Gemara is like oozing with such incredible life meaning. What do you see from here? The power of Zrizos. Power of Zrizos. So I both say, in life, sometimes, you say to yourself, what does it matter if it gets done quickly or it just gets done in a regular pace? It matters everything, because how you do something really represents how you feel about that initiative. If you drag your feet, it shows that you don't really want to do it. If you do it with zrizos, that shows ultimately, again, that alacrity in this act shows the chashiva. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? That expediting temple service, doing something with greater zrizos, is called avoda. Incredible. So therefore, what comes out from this? So it comes out of this first of all statement of Rava, namely that the halacha is you need to take the closest exit if you become tamei inside of the Beis Hamikdash. But interestingly enough, we don't care. It's fascinating. We don't care how long it takes you to get to the closest exit, as long as what? As long as you're moving. As long as you're moving, we don't care. Right? You're literally taking baby steps. As long as you're moving, right? Even if it takes you the whole day, we don't care as long as you're taking it. So I'll say, tremendous Moshe Haskell. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just wants us to move. Even if it's baby steps, as long as I am moving in the right direction, the Ribono Shel Olam is happy with me. Now we just saw this case of the Kohen who becomes Tameh inside of the Beis HaMikdash and does Avodah in a state of Tumah. Ultimately, again, is going to be liable for Misvidei Shamayim, as long as he doesn't linger. If he lingers, then he's going to be Chayiv Kares. What's the case of Avodah without lingering? It's the case of where he walks out, and as he walks out, he engages in an act of flippage. He goes ahead and he flips the piece of sacrificial meat, and specifically a case where he causes the piece of meat to burn faster post-flippage than it would have burned pre-flippage. And halacha l'maisa, expediting of the burning of sacrificial meat is considered to be avodah as well. Incredible. Let's go weiter. It's not over. Amar Boshia. This is a great statement. Ba'ina de'ema milsa. So this is so sweet, right? Rav Oshia says, I want to say over a halacha in the Beis Medrash, umistafina mechavre, but I'm afraid of my friends, right? What does this mean? I'm afraid I'm going to say something and everyone is going to jump down on my throat. Incredible. We've all had moments like that, right? But I really want to share it, but I'm afraid that everyone's going to jump on me. So what does he want to say? This is great. Hanichnas lebeis hamenuga, derech hachorav. So listen to this. Suppose you have a house with saras. Now remember again, what's the halacha after you have a home like a home that is declared saras, the saras home? So what's the halacha? Anything inside of it, including people who enter into it, will become tamei. But listen to Rav Oshia's idea. He says he wants like this. What happens if a person walks into the house backwards? Derech hachorav. Person walks into a house backwards. Ba'afilu kulo chutz mechotmo tar. And even if his entire body is in the house, except his nose, right? So his nose is extending out, but obviously what this means is the overwhelming majority of his body, is inside the home, but a part of his body, even a tiny part of his nose is outside. Tahar. Wow, he's tahar. Why? What's this great? Because he quotes over here the pasuk, V'haba el habayis. So this is talking about V'habal habayis kol yimei hizgiro, so yitma da'erev. If you come into a home of saras, you are tamei. Now what was Rav Oshia dashing? Derech bia asr Torah. So the Torah only asers if you enter what's called derech bia. What does derech bia mean? Normal mode of entry. What's the normal way of walking into a house? Normal way of walking into a house? I don't know what you call it, like face first, right? Face first, right? So therefore, Rava wanted to say, if you walk in backwards, so lemaisa, again, you're not going to contract tumah. Okay, so this sounds pretty logical. What was Rav Oshia afraid of? Umistafina mechavre. I'm afraid that my friends are going to say, well, Rav Oshia, if you're right, ihachi kulonami. Then why does a piece of your body have to still remain outside? The way Rav Oshia framed the halacha was, you walk into the house backwards, and your entire house is inside of the body with the exception of your nose. There's a little piece of your body still extending out. So he was afraid that his friends were going to say, well, Rav Oshia, if you're right, then even if your entire body is inside the home, as long as you walked in backwards, so lamaisa, again, you should be tar. Amar Rav said, no, that's not true. Kulo logara mikilim shebabayis. That's not true. If your entire body is in the home, everyone will agree that what? Everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa, you become tamei. Why? Dichsiv v'lo yitma kol asher babayis. Because ultimately, you're going to both say, because halacha, I'm sorry, kulo lo gara mikilim shebayis dichsiv v'lo yitma kol asher babayis. They will say, because for example, let's say utensils inside the home. What's the halacha? They become tamei. Now, utensils, interestingly enough, were there even before the tamei incident, right? Even before the home became a home of tzaras. So what do you see from here? Anything that is fully in the home, of course, becomes tamei. So everyone will agree that if a person is fully inside the home, even if they entered backwards, they're going to remain tamei. The Chiddush of Rav Oshia, which seems to be correct, which is if you walked in backwards, as long as there's a part of your body that's not in the home, you will remain tahar. Incredible. I will say along these same lines, the Gemara says, Tanya Miyachir, Bryce that supports this. And I will say, so what do you see from here? What you see from here is that halacha l'maisa, sometimes when there is liability, what we'll call geographic tuma, you're only going to be tamei if you enter into that space in the normal way. If you enter in an abnormal way, that could save you from becoming tamei. So we just saw this example by a home of tzaras. So again, and I will say, by the way, the Rambam accepts Rabbi Oshia's idea. So if you walk backwards into a home condemned with tzaras, as long as there's a part of your body that's not in the home, you will remain tar. Once your whole body enters, you're no different than Kalim. So we'll listen to this and say, that supports this. Gagin halalu. So we'll say, this is actually very interesting. Look at Rashi. Gagin halalu, Rashi says, Sheba Azara. Now we'll say, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, there were a series of chambers. Those chambers had rooftops. Those roofs do not have the same sanctity as the Beis HaMikdash itself. So the Gemara says, Gagin halalu, ein ochlin sham kachei kadashim. So therefore, again, you can't eat kachei kadashim on those rooftops. Vein shochtin sham kachim kalim. You can't shecht kachim kalim there either. V'tamei shenichnas derech gagin laheichal pater. And interestingly enough, if you are tamei and keep from the rooftop into the heichal, you are pater. Shene'emar ve'ala mikdash lo savo. Because the pasuk says, you shall not come to the mikdash in a state of tumah. Derech bia asra Torah. The Torah asks is what we call normative entry. And what's normative entry, Bosai? What's normative entry? You come through the entry to the Beis HaMikdash. But if you come from one of the rooftops down into the Heichal, there is not liability for that. So Bosai, so another display ultimately of this idea that halacha l'maisa, in order to be liable for entry, and again, so we saw it by tzaras. So again, I want to point out the tzaras case is different, because in the tzaras case, someone who's tahar is entering into a place that is tamei. In the Beis HaMikdash case, someone who's tamei is entering into the Beis HaMikdash, but it's the same principle. Essentially, what Rabbi Moshe is espousing, whenever you see the lashon of ba, of entry means a normative face first and normal entrance, right? But halacha l'maisa, let's say in the case of tzaras, if you walk in back first, you're not going to be liable. You won't become tamei. Beis HaMikdash, if you come from the rooftops instead of through the front door, through one of the normative gates, ultimately there will not be liability. There will not be liability as well. All right, we'll stop over for today. Next week is its own piece. What a way to start the week! Incredible aschala. We started this week bezrizos ba'ava, ba'amkus, be'slavos, and Mirza Hashem together this week and for many weeks to come. Shkayach, everyone. Everyone's going to have a great day, everyone. Good morning.
I have a question. With regard to castrating, so the Gemara doesn't say why it has to be directly towards the Kodesh Kodeshim, but I'm